Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for having me to this session. My study investigates the role of translation in managing earthquake risk. An important theme in sciences and technology studies is to identify courses of action that enable actors from different fields to cooperate with each other. Those are also defending their own interests and values, according to authors such as Michel Caron. Then my study will show that the translation of risk allows for better city planning process. I intend the phrase earthquake risk in a broad sense, meaning both the risk of an earthquake occurring and risk following it. This can be collapsed building and infrastructure damages, for instance. This broad notion of risk derives from actor network theory, which I will discuss at greater length. My findings are based on the way scientists define earthquake risk for Istanbul. They are also based on how they try to discuss the ways those produce scientific facts are included in urban planning tools. In that sense, I will intend now to question how urban tools contain earthquake risk. So first, according to the theoretical framework I follow, there is no reason to make any distinction between nature and culture. Indeed, by following Bruno Latour's work, the world is composed of hybrids that do not belong completely to either of those categories. Earthquake risk illustrates this. There is no a priori reason to separate physical from cultural factors in analyzing a risk within a particular territory. Actor network theory emphasizes the heterogeneity of our society, which is composed of both human and non-human actors, and the networks that connect them with each other. The networked interaction of these actors make their identity unstable. Following this logic, Bruno Latour considers non-humans as actants, insofar as they participate in defining a human's identity within a network. By means of their interaction, all of them participate in the definition of a risk, actually. Valérie November is one researcher who has used NT to understand the relationships between a risk and a given territory. She follows all the actants in the way they identify, evaluate, and mitigate the risk. By this way, she considers the total risk level to be the product of translation and reconfiguration occurring. So, how to analyze actants' relationship to earthquake risk mitigation and urban production? Michel Caron uses the notion of interestment, defined as all the action through an entity attempts to impose and to stabilize the identity of other actants. This is made possible by its problematization. So according to those issues, we can focus on the following actors. Scientists, for instance, aims to model earthquake waves according to geological and geophysical data. Engineers aimed at ensuring the solidity of building. Planners attempt to cure the urban crisis, as said by Vivian Claude. Inhabitants are concerned about their safety, and so on. We can also point out some non-humans in negotiations, such as the seismic waves, geologic layers, seismic faults, and building. Seismic waves need to spread into the ground, while building can create obstacles for the implementation of an urban project, for instance. One common problem arises from those actants is the following. Is it possible to live with the risk of an earthquake? I chose in this study to focus on scientists and follows the latter's works evaluating the mode of enunciation that enables one to detect all the absence elements, even if they are presupposed by speech. My methodology is based on Bruno Latour and Steve Woolgar's statement saying that the laboratory is part of networks and takes care of facts, not theory. The main question is how a scientific fact is produced. So the methodology of this study is divided into three parts. First, three articles have been chosen for their recurrence in research about the North Anatolian Fault in the Marmara Sea in Turkey. One article from Şengör and Ali, Yaltarak and Armijo and Ali. So those articles have been analyzed according to the type of statement made by Latour and Woolgar in their study on laboratory life. Therefore, by identifying the statements in scientific article according to this type, that we will be able to identify recurrences or exception, agreement, disagreement about the same topics. Secondly, for each of those three articles, I selected 5 articles that quoted it in order to follow the statements and see how they are quoted. I analyzed how each of the articles citing the original 3 articles quoted. And then, finally, I completed my analysis with 6 semi-directed interviews with geologists and geophysicists in Istanbul. Then, the analysis of the statement shows that those appeared in an organized structure within the 3 articles, as the following. A first part includes general facts at the continental scale that are taken for granted by the scientific community. General organization of the plates, their direction and their displacement. Most of the time, researcher relies on other researchers to support the facts. The more reference there are, actually, the more consistency the fact acquires. We can also find speculation and hypothesis. A second part explains the method and tools used. They are justified because already used by peers, while the methods are the same for the 3 researchers. Analysis by bathymetry, for instance. They distinguished from each other by the place analyzed in the Marmara Sea and the number of data collected. A third part explained and analyzed the data by giving fact on relying on other statements with its modalities. I observed the use of conditional tense, for instance, to qualify the analysis. This part shows that data are interpreted and needs either to be validated by others, either to be considered as hypothesis. This is why all the article contains a discussion part to refute or validate other scientific assumptions or to create new hypotheses, actually. A fifth part, as a conclusion, provide conjecture and speculation. And a last part consists of an acknowledgement that includes institutions that gave research funds, for instance, university, laboratories, colleagues, publicists, organization staff, etc. Those actors contributed in the production of scientific facts. Then, the first analysis shows us that the production of scientific fact is included in a wide network of human and non-humans as well. While the structure of each article is very stable, I observe that statements are actually not. They rely on other statements and they contain assumptions. Based on the corpus of 15 articles, then I observe that the way such statements circulate, those are circulating outside the laboratory. They also take place in other networks, including researchers who do not belong to the same research field, for instance, who are from other countries. Often, the initial statement is transformed while circulating. Indeed, the more the statement circulates, the more it acquires consistency and legitimacy. So, according to interviews conducted with geologists and geophysicists, engineers, 3 main parameters are necessary to evaluate the earthquake risk at a given location. First, the wave source. Second, the geological structure of the ground, and then the geological structure on the built site. I decided, based on the article's analysis, as said before, to focus on the wave sources. On that point, it turned out that researchers are disagreeing on the position and the character of the North Anatolian Fault below the Marmara Sea. For instance, Cenk Yaltırak defends a type of pull-apart fault, which is a stubborn fault giving rise to an elongated sedimentary basins. Rolando Armijo will defend a type in step, whereas Jengal Schenger will defend a fault in a single segment. While researchers aim to produce a more precise topography map of the Marmara Sea from the bathymetrical data, those can be imprecise and sensitive to any perturbation aiding noises into the triangulation map. Then, I can point out at least two difficulties for geophysical engineers to determine the real shape and location of the fault, while many of the assumption analyses are issued from interpretation of data, for instance. It is also difficult to precisely determine the physical processes of the rupture, since the stress submitted by the displacement of the plates is not precisely quantifiable, but also because this stress is different according to the localization and impossible to apprehend as a whole, taking into account scale reports. So then, how to qualify the earthquake risk? In the end, for scientists, the earthquake risk constitutes a probability based on the quantification of the seismic waves, including magnitude and approximated date of the next earthquake, with a percentage of uncertainties. This percentage contains all the previous uncertainties analyzed before. We can take as an example this statement that we find a 60, more or less 15% probability, one standard deviation, of strong shaking during the next 30 years, and 32, more or less 12% during the next decade. At this point of the demonstration, I observed then that a scientific fact taken as given hides many uncertainties, while it is used to produce tools for decisions such as master plan. These uncertainties are indicative of the instability of the agent in the networks in which they are involved, actually. By reducing these uncertainties, the agents seek to stabilize agent as actors. I aim now to observe how scientific facts are included into sociotechnical tools in urban planning. Sociotechnical tools enable, as the definition of Michel Calon, to stabilize all the actors. According to Madeleine Acriche, their role is to constitute organizing elements of relations between humans and non-humans, among themselves and with their environment. It is also interesting to consider the performative dimension pointed out by Valérie November. So the analysis of 3 sociotechnical tools for urban planning has revealed how scientific statements have shaped them and how those tools have transformed them in return. After the earthquake of 1999 in the Marmara region, an earthquake master plan for Istanbul has been elaborated to propose solutions for earthquake risk mitigation in urban planning. 4 Turkish universities have been involved to produce analysis, spelling, and other international institutions such as the JICA. It appears then that the main statement about the earthquake risk is the one from some persons just cited before, actually. It shows the selection among scientific statements among all the analyses on earthquake to produce a tool, and this selection is not neutral. Secondly, the purpose of the disaster law, said Afet Yasası in Turkish, implemented in 2012, is to provide a solution to reduce the risk of a seismic disaster and to create a better environment and better housing. It appears that assessment on risk zones are not directly coming from scientists, but other institutions, such as the Ministry of Construction and Urban Planning, TOKI, or private person. Then this law enables people who are not scientists actually to speak for them. Third, the master plan for the urban renewal for Istanbul has for purpose to produce an integrated approach to disaster-sensitive urban transformation. While analyzing the risk map, we can see that the zoning risk is reduced to a hierarchy of 3 levels of risk that is not only taking in account the earthquake risk. The scientific statement undergoes new translation. Then, the analysis of these 3 socio-technical devices in the light of scientific fact has shown that the scientific fact, after being selected, can be qualified as ready-made sciences and are subject to new translation in the development of devices federating and stabilizing identities actant. These devices are performative, insofar as each of them will use the same information, but will have different scopes and will carry different challenges and criticisms. The actor network theories has shown us that questioning the matter of the risk containment requires to follow the practices of each actant, playing a role in the negotiations throughout the production in social technical devices, and the way they define a risk. This would enable us to have wide knowledges on the value of a social technical device and the interest which it carries. Thank you very much for your attention and stay safe.